Bannerlord, a game where you can recruit a massive army, feed them like Americans, lead them to battle, engage in diplomacy, and much more. But if you're like me, that gets boring. To spice things up, I decided to roleplay as Galadriel of Amazon. The goal with this campaign is twofold: conquer the world and to make Galadriel more believable. And since she's got dialogue like this,
I am not some courtier to be placated by idle flattery.
And this.
I have a hurricane in me that will strip Spain bare!
Whoops, wrong clip. That lady actually knows how to act.
There's a tempest in me.
We'll have to do it solo because she's so cringe nobody would ever join her party. And so I present to you the Solo Person World Conquest, Galadriel Edition. As shocking as this concept might be, we start off as a dumpy-looking, unskilled little girl. No crouching tiger, hidden dragon fight scenes, no overpowering several grown men by herself, just some focus points into bow and riding and a dream of greatness. Like most campaigns, we start by murdering some sheep for profit, stripping down into our undies, and buying some gear. A horse, a bow, and a couple quivers of arrows. And no Bannerlord campaign would be complete without bullying the looters for a bit. Just enough to equip the better bow. I have a severe allergy to spending money, so we enter the local tournament to win some clothing and armor instead of paying for it. The Khazate tournaments are the perfect place to flex, given Galadriel's proclivity towards mounted cowardice. In true Amazon fashion, we clean up everyone round after round and cruise our way to an easy shit. I guess a young girl boss shouldn't be winning 100% of the time. So I went back to picking on unskilled looters and bandits. I spent weeks clearing the countryside of illegals, destroying them with ease. Well, most of the time anyways. I fought bigger and bigger packs of bandits, but got too cocky and was captured. You can't keep a strong, independent woman down for long, however, and I quickly escaped and murdered them. The foundation of the Galadriel build is done. Maxed out riding, athletics, and bow. We even covered our naked body with rags, but still have a long way to go before reaching Amazon levels of perfection. It's time to solo a bandit camp. While there are no trolls here, there are many unshielded idiots who make for good target practice. We snipe our way through the whole camp and reach the final bandit boss, who doesn't even have a shield. When will men learn? After weeks of forming bandits, it was time to avenge the tournament loss. Galadriel's skills had improved enough to sweep through all 4 rounds, easily winning a stitched leather coat. It's not the shining armor she deserves, but it's better than rags. And in the next tournament, she won some girl boss shoulder armor. Almost as ridiculous as suits from the 80s, but with more protection. It wasn't long before men from around the world began to take notice of Galadriel's prowess, and Tharos of the Southern Empire offered her a mercenary contract. Not only would she earn more dinars for the same bandit farming she was already doing, but now she could commit genocide against civilians, staying true to Papa Bezos' lore. She rampaged through villages by herself, slaughtering dozens at a time with bow, spear, and mace alike. Nobody was safe from Galadriel's greed. But unlike the show, reality set in when stepping up to larger targets. Over 70 militia were defending this village. She managed to kill a few dozen militia, but eventually ran out of arrows and health to continue. After healing up for a few days, she tried again at a different village, but was once again rebuffed. You might be starting to wonder, how come the show makes it look so easy?
Bullshit!
Here's the truth. Galadriel makes mistakes, but she's quick to learn and always gets her revenge. She returned to the village once more, but instead of trying to brute force the fight, she circled her foe slowly, allowing the archers to separate from the spears and began picking them off with a mace. Once the biggest threat was gone, she swapped to her bow and arrows, picking off the peasants from a safe distance and avoiding their stones. Finally, she corralled the spearmen into a tight circle, so tight that their attacks would bounce off their neighbors, rendering their formation useless. This is what a true warrior looks like. Galadriel spent the next few weeks exterminating anyone who crossed her path. Villagers, peasants, militia, desert bandits, it didn't matter. Her renown had grown so much that leaders from all across Calradia requested an audience with her. But there was only one worthy of her presence, the sole female ruler in Calradia, Rhagaea herself. She offered Galadriel a place in her kingdom as a noble and a vassal, which she humbly accepted. The next few weeks were about as entertaining as the Rings of Power.
It's a 2 out of 10.
Lots of repetitive battles killing peasants, desert bandits, and more. But the results were worth the grind. Athletics reaching nearly 200, bow well past 200, and riding approaching 300. But then something interesting happened. Galadriel finally met her match in a bandit boss duel. They traded blows back and forth until each had a single hit left. Then it devolved into nearly 5 minutes straight of a stalemate, going back and forth until the bandit made a fatal mistake. She then proceeded to clam slam his lifeless body as punishment for the ordeal. While crossing the bridge to the Empire, she came across her first real challenge, an enemy noble with 79 troops. He only had a single archer in his party, so it should be straightforward. Load up on arrows to deal with the cavalry, then pick off the infantry with a spear. The enemy cavalry charged forward with shields raised, making good shots impossible. Except this idiot who decided his polearm was more important. Even with 300 riding skill and a good horse, they easily caught up to Galadriel and forced her to back off. And that's when it came to her. She put 100 meters distance between them and stopped, goading the enemy cavalry into a target so irresistible they couldn't help but charge at full speed ahead.
It's a trap!
She bolted forward at the last second, sending half of the cavalry careening over the cliff's edge to their death. She dehorsed the rest of the riders and systematically picked them off one by one, and eliminated as many unshielded troops as she could. By the time she swapped her bow for a spear, some of the cavalry had remounted and were chasing once more. The safest tactic here was to target the horses first, then fight the giant ball of foot troops. It's easier said than done though, and she took a massive hit to the arm, nearly wiping her out from the fight. Fighting in the open field was too dangerous, so she moved to the nearest rock outcrop to break up their formation and slow them down. She dropped one after another, isolating them and stabbing them dead. Now for the easiest part. All she had to do was clean up the remaining infantry and... back to square one. After a few days, she escaped captivity and scurried north to lick her wounds. It was time to start developing her smithing skills. She wouldn't be crafting silly jewelry though. No, she needed better weapons. More damage and longer reach would have prevented the previous fiasco. She spent the next year winning tournaments to keep her skills fresh, working the forge, and even started training her secret weapon, hand-thrown artillery shells delivered from horseback. But she still needed 200 levels to reach 250 throwing and unlock the most OP perk in the game.
Perfect.
It wasn't always easy, and when she wasn't working on her skills, she was building character through adversity. Breaking the third wall here. If there's one lesson I've learned from watching the Amazon's Rings of Power show, it's to never overstay your welcome. I've got over 150 hours of recordings to cover here, but unlike the editors of that show, I will not draw this out needlessly to hit 10 episodes. Back to our show now. Galadriel spent years grinding out smithing and throwing in order to become a one-woman wrecking ball that could solo any noble party on the map. Or at least that was the plan in her head. Rhagaea was notified of the failures and gave her a free castle. After all, we can't have a failing female lead, right Kathy? She headed to Annika Castle to set things straight. Her garrison immediately saw themselves out as she arrived per the rules. With only 70 levels to go for throwing, she went back to mass murdering locals. Her castle at Annika was besieged by the enemy and would likely fall soon. This presented a new problem. Losing a fief while being a vassal causes you to lose relationship with the king or queen and, more importantly, loses some influence. We'll need to save every drop of influence we earn, so the solution here is to generously gift the fief back to the Empire for someone else to lose for her. Feyron was now the new short-term owner of Annika. But her luck would soon change. She came across a tiny party from the Hidden Hand, one she could easily handle. They only had a single cavalry unit to deal with and a few knife throwers which quickly fell. Leosis of the Hidden Hand was our first noble captured, but certainly not the last. And with the throwing level 200 perk, she can take an extra 8 javelins into battle, which would come in handy a few weeks later when she attacked a group of 41. With only 2 cavalry units and a single archer, the small army quickly fell. But she couldn't pick on small armies forever and would need better gear to handle larger armies. So back to the smithing she went. After toiling for weeks, she came up with the best sword design in the game, the Foxblade, or as I like to call it, Satan's Tooth. It tears through shields, can one-shot armored enemies, and can be used as a one-handed or two-handed weapon. Her skills were still lacking though, producing the rusty variant with mild stat debuffs. Not that it mattered, Satan's Tooth destroys anything it touches, bad quality be damned. The next major fight was against the Beni Zalal, who brought a much larger force of 77 troops, with the enemy cavalry as their main threat. Their riders were faster than her horse and quickly caught up, landing an early hit and forcing her onto the defensive. She focused on the cavalry first, using javelins to bring down every mount before they could overwhelm her. With the cavalry gone, enemy archers continued to land shots, forcing her to keep circling just to avoid taking more damage. Another hit nearly finished her off, and switching to the bow at long range didn't do enough to thin out their numbers. With With no safe way to disengage, she committed to melee, staying close and slowly taking enemies out one by one. That briefly worked, but a javelin thrown at close range ended the fight, and Galadriel was defeated and captured once again. After losing Tamna Castle to the Aserai, Galadriel was forced straight back into the field, where she ran into Dacius of the Ember, who was leading a 39-unit party. The fight quickly turned into a long, grindy battle. She took an early hit, then focused on the cavalry, using javelins while constantly trying to avoid archer fire. Even after the cavalry was eliminated, her health was dangerously low, too low to safely disengage to swap out equipment. When her weapons ran dry, she scavenged a spear from the ground just to stay in the fight. She separated the archers by circling around a large rock, but took another shot in the process, leaving her barely alive. With no other option, she began charging to deal small amounts of charge damage, slowly wearing the enemy down. A single enemy spearman nearly ended the run by stopping her horse, but she avoided taking any damage with a lot of luck. Shortly after, her horse was killed from underneath, forcing her to sprint through the fight to find another mount. Using tight circling and the spear, she eventually finished the remaining troops, barely surviving the battle. Not long after, Galadriel saved a caravan from Sothoris of the Embers, who was leading a tiny party. The fight was short, the noble was captured, and both him and his troops were donated for a large amount of influence and charm XP. This progress pushed throwing to 250, unlocking the best perk in the game, Impale, allowing javelins to penetrate shields. She was soon awarded with Shabal Zumar Castle, but the momentum didn't last. In her next fight against Lavolios of the Hidden Hand and an 82-unit noble party, she tested the new throwing perk for the first time. While fighting near water, she was caught by the cavalry and took a heavy hit. Moments later, she was caught again and defeated, taken prisoner, proving that even with top-tier perks and some plot armor, large noble parties were still a serious threat. The rematch against Lavolios of the Hidden Hand was one of the toughest fights of the campaign. He fielded 82 troops, including 19 cavalry, and getting caught even once would have ended the run. Galadriel kept her distance and used the Impale throwing perk to pick off the cavalry one by one, letting the javelins punch straight through the shields. After the last rider fell, she threw the remaining javelins from long range to safely thin out the shielded troops, including a headshot from over 60 meters that dealt a massive amount of damage. With the cavalry gone, she switched to her bow and used the terrain to remove the remaining ranged units, dismounting at times to safely shoot from extreme distances while also building her athletic skill. By this point, both bow and throwing were approaching 275. Once the archers were weakened, she closed the distance and used tight circling to avoid most incoming damage while cutting them down in melee. Satan's Tooth proved invaluable here, especially when archers mixed in with the infantry. She pulled back to force them to separate, then re-engaged to finish them off. When the archers finally ran out of ammunition, she switched to a polearm to deal with the remaining troops. Their armor was very strong and her polearm skill was low, turning the final stretch into a slow, exhausting grind. The last enemy was defeated on foot and the Valios was captured, followed by several key gear upgrades including better armor, boots, and horse barding. From there, Galadriel defeated multiple nobles in quick succession, pushing throwing to 275 and unlocking a perk that boosted damage and projectile speed. Bow also reached 275, which improved reload speed and damage. Captured lords and prisoners were donated for influence and charm XP, which unlocked the warlord perk and increasing influence gains from battle. The momentum had briefly halted by what should have been an easy battle, where she was surrounded and pounded by enemy cavalry, captured, and even lost a 70,000 dinar noble longbow in the process. With athletics and smithing now clearly lagging behind, she shifted focus towards developing those skills. Soon after, she joined a massive battle between the Southern Empire and the Aserai, staying on the edges of the fight to pick off horse archers, knocking out fellow she-noble Shimra, and even had time for her favorite pastime, murdering allied troops. One more lord was captured and donated, leaving her with nearly 400 influence banked for the shenanigans to come soon. With the war finally over, Galadriel used the downtime to focus on long-term progress. She spent the peace grinding smithing, unlocking one-handed Falk's blade to pair more effectively with the shield and tighter fights. To round out her build, she farmed looters to safely raise combat skill, won tournaments to stay sharp, and steadily pushed athletics to 275. That final milestone provided a massive increase to her health pool, which removed one of the biggest weaknesses in her solo setup and prepared her for the next phase of the campaign. Galadriel was perfectly capable of taking on the world by herself, but that would require far too much manual labor. Instead, she would work smart and get everyone else to work hard for her. She built a stockpile of influence through battles, donating to allied clans, and avoiding spending influence on any votes, no matter the cost. She could now call votes that everyone in the kingdom would have to spend influence to either support or reject. Don't want peace with Aserai? No problem, it'll cost you some influence. In fact, it'll cost them more than Galadriel spent to call the vote in the first place. You want to give a fief to Galadriel? That vote will cost you. Then she will give it back to the Empire and you'll spend even more influence again. Do this enough times and clans soon run out of influence. Unfortunately, she ran out of influence as well, so she went back to grinding for a couple more years. It was now 7 years into the campaign and Galadriel was ready for the big finale. All the clans were low on influence while she had over 10 times more than everyone else. She called a few more peace votes to drain the remaining influence and pulled this one weird trick Tailworlds doesn't want you to know about. She voted to expel the most influential clan from the kingdom, Vitranis. And because nobody has influence left, only 2 clans opposed the vote and she overpowered them with only 60 influence. Clan Mesterkaros was next, requiring only 20 influence to be kicked. Clan after clan was kicked from the kingdom and nobody could stop it. Eventually, even Rhagaea ran out of influence and couldn't oppose anything, so the rest of the clans were kicked by a default judgment. By the end, only Penthros, the ruler, Bezos' wet dream team, and 2 mercenary clans were left since you can't kick the ruler and mercenaries can't own land or vote. For now, Rhagaea was the sole owner of all fiefs in the kingdom, but over the next couple of days, votes were called to determine who would own these orphaned fiefs. And once again, Rhagaea had been outmaneuvered, drained of all her influence and making it trivial to steal all the fiefs. Cyrenea changed hands next, then Physeon, Vostrom, Poros, and all the rest. Rhagaea was left with a single fief, while Galadriel ended up with 8, 4 of which were towns. Rhagaea was still trying to claw back some of her homeless clans, but Galadriel plunged the final dagger. She vote-kicked another clan out of the kingdom before leaving and taking all of her fiefs with her. This would now pit her in a war against her former liege, but Rhagaea would be too weak and poor to mount a strong offense in retaliation. She was even captured by Galadriel only weeks after their split, but Galadriel exercised patience and let others do the dirty work for her. She bided her time, capturing small nobles when she could until the winter of Year 8 when another kingdom swooped in to take Rhagaea's final fief. The Southern Empire, once the strongest kingdom in all the lands, was dismantled from the inside by a single girl boss. Galadriel's holdings had grown significantly, but she was just getting started. She sought out her strongest neighbor, Emperor Lucan, and joined him as a vassal. This would not only provide protection for her fiefs, but also allow her to save up influence faster from policies. Lucan had nearly 8,000 influence, so she needed all the help she could get to catch up. The Northern Empire already had serfdom and feudal inheritance, which give influence per day based on how many fiefs you owned, and since Galadriel owned twice as many as anyone else, it was only a matter of time before she would catch up to them. Now her priorities shifted. Instead of running down small noble parties, she would help capture as many fiefs as possible, then ensure none of them would go to the Emperor. As the common saying goes, bippity boppity, your fiefs will soon be my property. She helped take Danustica from the Aserai, picking countless troops from the walls and making sure Lucan was not voted the new owner. She followed the front line, doing the same at other fiefs. From time to time, she would call fake votes, and since it only cost her 75 for the vote and Lucan was spending 150, she would only need about 4,000 to drain him down to 0. Over the next couple of years, Galadriel settled into a routine, defending allied fiefs, fighting anything around her that moved, and stashing away as much influence as she possibly could. Eventually, she tested the waters by seeing how many peace votes she can get away with. Vote after vote, Lucan dumped 150 influence to swat it down. Eventually she ran out, but Lucan now had less than 2,500 and would soon be overwhelmed. Millions of dinars were stacking up since Galadriel had no friends or troops to spend them on, so she continued to upgrade her fiefs. One day she'll be a billionaire, she thought, just like Papa Bezos. But that was a long way off, so back to the grind again. She was fighting bigger and bigger armies by herself, but was consistently winning now. She even got to practice human bowling from time to time. Lucan was soon within reach, and after a few more votes, she caught up to him. But to take over, she would need to save a few thousand more influence for the vote kicks and stealing fiefs. She eventually passed Lucan, but the situation was dicey. Aserai declared war, and the Northern Empire now had war on 3 different fronts. Losing fiefs was a real possibility now, so Galadriel set out to end these wars in favor of stability. 2 kingdoms signed peace deals, but the Khazaits were losing badly, so the war was allowed to continue. Galadriel was even allowed to be a national hero, driving off over 300 troops by herself. She sallied out to harass the archers on horseback, but the return fire was too much and she retreated back inside. She had just enough time for a couple rounds of human bowling, even picking up a turkey on this frame. Then back on the horse to harass and pick them off one by one through the streets. With only 96 arrows to start with and over 300 enemies to shoot, she retreated back to the walls several times to restock. Eventually, she grinded the melee forces down and only the archers were left, who idiotically charged in with their melee weapons out. Or at least they did for a couple minutes, and then decided it was a good time to shoot. Her horse was up to the challenge though, and mowed down the remaining archers in the streets, causing a massive rout. Galadriel had single-handedly defended an important town from the Khazate hordes. It was now year 13 of the campaign, and she had finally saved up enough influence for a repeat performance. She disbanded the remaining armies, forcing them to reform and burn more influence, then spammed peace votes until everyone was empty and began expelling the clans one by one. Legally, there was nothing they could do but watch in horror as their friends and families became destitute. 12 clans in total were ejected from the kingdom, leaving only the ruler and his mercenaries. Then the remaining fiefs were put up for auction, but Lucan was broke and everything went to Galadriel. Once again, she had outwitted her peers. 24 fiefs in total had changed hands in a matter of days, leaving Lucan with only 3 fiefs. But it wasn't enough for Galadriel. Down with the patriarch, she thought. She started by revoking all positive policies, especially ones that would give influence to the ruler. Then military coronet was passed, making troops more expensive to field, and since she had an army of 1, it would only serve to bankrupt Lucan faster. He was still considered rich, even with his kingdom in tatters, but Galadriel had a plan for that too. She would redo all of the peace treaties for the Empire and turn income into debt. Aserai was paying nearly 5,000 daily, so she declared war to rescind the contract and sued for peace, all within the same meeting. Now Lucan would be paying nearly 11,000 dinars per day to the Aserai. She repeated the process with her other neighbors. Sturgia would receive a hefty 17,000 per day. Battania would get 4,000 and 7,500 to the Khazates. Galadriel was on the hook for half of these payments, but only for as long as she remained in the Empire. So she packed up her things and left, taking the fiefs and leaving the debt with Lucan. He was in such dire straits that he sued for peace without asking for a single dinar in payment from Galadriel. Within days, Lucan's wealth had plummeted to average, and by the end of the year, he was broke. Galadriel had amassed personal holdings even greedy Durthert would only dream of, with 32 in total. Her little empire now spanned half of the Empire, and even parts of the Khazate and Aserai homelands. But that also opened her fiefs up to attack from all over, so she switched up her strategy to mitigate these risks. She spent time increasing relations with local notables and gaining their support for extra influence. While she wouldn't be able to gain influence from battles, she could save it from supporters and her fiefs until she had enough to take over the next kingdom before even joining. Sitting around doing nothing was never an option for Galadriel, so she got back to work, leveling up her medicine skill with the local bogans and keeping an eye out for rebellions. Rhagaea had thrown off their Vlandian shackles, but it was only a matter of time before the greedy bastards came back to claim it, so she rushed over. She cleared rebel clan after rebel clan in the field until a massive Vlandian army was spotted to the south, forcing her to start the siege. The garrison immediately sallied out, but they too were no match for Galadriel. She blasted soldier after soldier, only pausing to pick up dead men's arrows from the floor, and eventually there were none left. After nearly 2 months, the siege camp finished, and she was able to assault the town. 109 arrows wouldn't be enough to clear the over 200 defenders, so she opted to rush the ladders, jump the defenders, put the fall damage reduction perk to good use, and snipe the rest from a nearby arrow barrel. Not even 15 minutes later and the battle was done. She had captured an entire town by herself. Jalmaris would rebel not long after and suffered the same fate. Then Carbanseth, then Seanon. It was time to put the new strategy to the test. She pledged fealty to Sturgia, bringing her nest egg of 5,000 influence along with her. She already had more than half of what the ruler had in the bank, and after some policy shenanigans, she was earning almost 100 more per day passively. Once again, she drained everyone's influence and controlled the war votes. Her focus now shifted to eliminating the weakest kingdoms off the map, the Western Empire. That's one less kingdom she would have to destroy from within. With Sturgia no longer useful to her, she hollowed them out and left with her fiefs. Rhagaea was so broke he couldn't afford to pay a single dinar for peace. While the map was looking better by the year, Galadriel knew she would have to be careful with her next couple of moves, as Father Time would be racing her to the finish line. She continued to solo rebel towns while she saved up influence and thought about her options. Of the factions left on the map, only 2 were worthy of her time, starting with Vlandia. And because everyone hates Vlandia so much, we skip to the end where they are left with nothing. Now you might be wondering why she left Vlandia alone with 5 fiefs to the ruler's name? Taking them out one by one would take years to do on her own. Instead, she played Puppet Master and invited the Aserai to come in and clean up the mess for her, relying on the law of bippity boppity. After all, the Aserai ruler had only a single fief to his name and would make for the perfect final target. While the ruling clan did have almost 24,000 influence, Galadriel brought 90 fiefs with her and would quickly catch up. Vlandia had only a single fief left, so she rushed east to join the war against Khazate. Like the French at Verdun or Gandalf with the Balrog, Galadriel swore they would not pass, no matter the odds. She threw everything in the kitchen sink at the enemy, killing dozens at a time. She stayed inside the walls as long as she could, but was forced out by a tidal wave of humans. She had more room to maneuver outside the walls, but no arrow barrels to stock up with, so back inside she went to top up. After several hours of fighting and 3 separate assaults, Galadriel had finally prevailed over the enemy, killing over 700 in the final wave. She proudly waved her flag. Wait, what? Let's back up here a second. 480 influence awarded for winning the battle. They had literally a single person survive to escape the battle, but because I didn't have enough HP to engage at the end, that solo peasant took me prisoner? Kathy, can you help out our heroine here, please? Through the power of editing and a second chance, she breezed through the attackers and won with more than enough health to not get screwed over by broken Tailworld's mechanics. She put over a dozen enemy nobles in the prison and proceeded to curb stomp what was left of the Khazates. As planned, Vlandia fell in the west. Only one thing could stop Galadriel from owning the world now, and it's the same thing that conquered Bezos years ago: greed. The Khazates were offering more money for a single day of peace than they could afford for over a decade, so she allowed it. She was earning well over 20 million dinars per day, which made her smile. But like all wealthy people, she got bored with the money and went back to war. The final Khazate castle fell and everybody breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, there was peace in the world. Until Galadriel started kicking people out from the last kingdom. One by one they went, like they always had. Only this time, there was nobody there to scoop them up after. She took fief after fief into her possession until there was only a single town not controlled by her. She took her fiefs, donned the beautiful black flag for a final time, and rode out to strike her enemies down. Sadly, there was no valiant final stand, no epic final battle, just hours and hours of riding in circles, shooting, and stabbing people. If you ever wondered why so many guards in Skyrim have this line,
I used to be an adventurer like you, and I took an arrow in the knee.
It's because of Galadriel. With the fall of Sinala, the kingdom of Aserai was destroyed, and every single noble in the world will be dead within a year or less, leaving dear Galadriel as the one and only noble left alive. She spent the rest of her days riding fief to fief, optimizing for profits, saving every dinar she could. On her 70th birthday, she watched her bank account roll over with another 0, finally joining the Billionaires Club. However, she was still short 2 zeros, and Papa Bezos had the final laugh.